Yeah, so welcome everybody officially. We're glad to have Jonathan here. So Jonathan is one of the four presenters. We chose four of our newer pastors so that folks could get to meet them a little in a little informal kind of way and take advantage of some of the gifts that they bring to the table for the whole church. And we're also grateful to the support of the College of Christian Churches in Canada, who have offered an honorarium to each of our four speakers. So we're grateful to them. And in lieu of a college lecturer, we decided to go with local homegrown talent and switch up the conversation a little bit. So Jonathan, I'll let you introduce yourself and open us up with prayer, and then we will start to dig in. So over to you.
Definitely. So just for those of you that don't know, I'm Pastor Jonathan from the Windsor Church, and I'm actually quite excited to be going through this conversation about the covenant with each of us that are here. I'm also excited that members of our congregation are present. We are one of the newer congregations to the disciples here in Canada, and I shared with them this morning the importance of us learning, especially the preamble. And I did call it Bible study this morning as well. So I hope that those of you that have joined aren't, I guess it is a form of Bible study because what we are reading is theological and biblically based. And so that would be good. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And I'm happy to see some of our folks from Windsor online. And Katie, I know she doesn't have her camera on, but I guess she's got it through the speakers at her house. And she's got about 6 members from our church hanging out in her backyard. So they're going to listen in as we are going through this. So I don't know, Jen, if you want me to go through the quick, I guess, outline of what we're going to do today. So we are going to go through our learning objectives. We will read the preamble. There are a few of us that, especially from Freedom Church, this is still very new. We are looking at ways to incorporate this in our everyday congregation, which later on we'll talk about Reverend Lee and how he incorporated in his congregation the preamble. And I actually think that those are some valid suggestions, and we're all going to have opportunity to talk about that within our breakout time or our time together in some of the reflection questions. We are going to watch a video from Reverend Lee, and then afterwards we are going to go through some reflection questions and get to know each other. So why don't we open up in a word of prayer? So if that's all right with you, gracious God, we thank you. We thank you for just another day that you have blessed us with, another day that we can stand and look to you, another day that we can see your love shine through each and every one of us. We just thank you for this day, God. We know that this is the day that you've made, and so we truly rejoice and we are glad in it. And so, God, as we go through the preamble and we go through what it means to be in covenant relationship with each other, with the church, with you, I pray, God, that you be in the midst of our conversations, that you be with us, that you divinely inspire us, and that you open up the eyes of our understanding so we can get to know you more and in a deeper context. We just thank you for everything you do. In Christ's name we pray, amen. All right. So I suppose we should dive in deep, unless, Jen, there was something else. I think, oh, there we go. So session 3. And I just want to go through the learning objectives real quick. So that's the second slide. And these are the learning objectives that we're going to go through today. We want to examine a lived out practical notion of covenantal relationships among the 3 manifestations of the Christian church. We also want to encourage community self-reflection on what congregations are already doing to live out covenantal relationships. And we also want to foster a space where the participants can imagine how congregations might engage covenantal relationships more deeply. And so just to give a little bit of background, I did attend, I don't know if any of you guys attended any of the, so the United States Church was offering some roundtable discussions. They called it town hall discussions. I don't know if anyone signed up for them, but I signed up for one of them just to kind of see what's happening in the United States Church. And They're talking a lot about this covenant and how do we get our covenantal relationship and covenantal practices discussed among our congregations throughout the entire denomination, essentially. Let's go through the preamble, which is the next slide. So I'm just going to read the preamble. So you guys have probably, maybe something happened with my PowerPoint there.
I tried to shift it to take out those little symbols for some reason, and I couldn't. Every time I did it, it deleted the slide. So that's why
I apologize. The contents there may not look pretty. I apologize, guys. So for those of you that have been in the classes or the sessions up to this point, you've probably read this every session. I apologize for not making it to the first two sessions. I am in the Doctorate of Ministry program at Ecumenical Theological Seminary in Detroit, and I had an intensive week of classes all last week, and so I am feeling a little, overfilled with information right now. And so if I talk a lot, just raise your hand and chime in, and you guys can, I promise I'll shut my mic off if you have something to say. But let's read this. This is important. This is part of our confession, and this is our covenant, the preamble. It's the beginning of the design of the Christian church for the disciples of Christ. And it says, as a member of the Christian church, we confess that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and proclaim him Lord and Savior of the world. In Christ's name and by his grace, we accept our mission of witness and service to all people. We rejoice in God, maker of heaven and earth, and in God's covenant of love, which binds us together and to one another. Through baptism in Christ, we enter into newness of life and are made one with the whole people of God. In the communion of the Holy Spirit, we are joined together in discipleship and in obedience to Christ. At the table of the Lord, we celebrate with thanksgiving the saving acts and presence of Christ. Within the universal church, we receive the gift of ministry and the light of Scripture. In bonds of Christian faith, we yield ourselves to God that we may serve the one whose kingdom has no end. Blessings, glory, and honor be to God forever. Amen. At this time, we're going to watch a quick video clip from Reverend Bill Lee in his conversations of a congregation living in covenant. And so, Reverend Jen, you're playing that, correct?
Can you hear it?
It's kind of distorted. I don't know if that's for everyone.
Well, good evening, everybody. I was asked to do a reflection on the covenant theology of hope in light of our design. And many of you know I've served the church in many capacities, moderator, boards, but I thought my best conversation tonight would talk as a local pastor, how the covenant, as I viewed it, impacted my ministry at Loudon Christian Church for 39 years. My disclaimer is that I was not born, I'm not a generational disciple. I came to the church in 1975, served at Alvin Jackson as a youth pastor and then as associate for a year. Alvin resigned, I became pastor in 1977, September 77. As I got to know the congregation and got to know the people, I discovered that based on what I had been reading and been told to read and the policy of the Christian church, that I was in conflict, or better, they were in conflict with me. They were a traditional disciple church, but what I had read and what they were telling me wasn't quite evening out. So I decided to meet with the elders and say, look, why don't we together read certain information, let us study together the Christian church as I'm being asked to do, so that we're on the same plane, we're working at this thing together. So I had in our regular monthly elder meetings, I stumbled upon what was called the preamble. I had never heard of that. I read the preamble, ended up reading the entire design. At that time, it was the provisional design, but when I saw it, and then it became the design. But the preamble caught me, and especially the line where it talks about the fact that in God's covenant of love, we are bound to one another. That made a lot of sense to me. So I talked with the elders, I said, you know, I think this is the kind of church we're supposed to be. And how can we incorporate this in the full life of the church? So we talked about it. So I asked, could I use this in board meetings as a way of talking to the board? So we did the preamble with the board. I did it in elders and deacons meetings. I kept playing around with this thing because it made sense. I said, gosh, I think we might have a church that works together, passing people, if this is what makes us work together. So that went well, but that was a small sampling of the congregation. So I said, how can we use this so that everybody gets it? So we used to do a litany every Sunday. So I asked the board and elders, why don't we incorporate what is the preamble into what is the affirmation of faith? Now, I got that from Ronald Osborne's book, The Faith We Affirm, which I later used as a teaching tool to the whole congregation and to my elders and to the board. I think this works. This is the faith we affirm. This is who we are as disciples. So beginning, I think the spring of 1978, until I retired October 23rd, 2016, every Sunday at Loudon Baptist Christian Church, we recited together the preamble, which is the affirmation of faith. So I decided, well, this may be the best way to do catechism. So we would recite it, but each month I would take a section and said, I think this is what this means. So that the congregation didn't just recite it, it became what we believe. It became our marching orders. And so if you come into Loudon Avenue now, at least they tell me they're still doing the affirmation of faith, and I've been gone, be 3 years next month. It's a marvelous way for me and for the church to almost crystallize. This is what we believe as church, especially covenant. That became the word for me. We're a covenant church. There's a larger church than Loudon Avenue. So I started looking again at the design and said, okay, part of being covenant is that there are certain manifestations of the church. So I said there's a general church, regional church, and then Loudon as a local church. Then I said, no, we have other entities, because we had, for us, the Piedmont District Convention, which is a black convention, and then we had District 3. So I said, we have to be part of all of this if we're going to be in covenant. And they said, well, Pastor, you keep saying covenant. I said, well, let's go back to the New Testament. Let's go back to communion. Let's go back to Passover. Remember, Jesus said, a new covenant I make with you. So this covenant of love that God has built with us through the blood of his son is the covenant that we celebrate. But it's not just a local church covenant. It's a covenant that we celebrate from Roanoke all the way to Indianapolis to Canada and all over the world. And so they kind of bought that. They kind of said, that's cool. It somehow made things cohesive for us. We had a good talking point. When new people would come to the church, I didn't have to start over. The congregation could tell them, say, well, what do you believe as a Christian church? And they would say, here's our affirmation of faith. They'd go right through it, which was a wonderful thing. That was the easy part. So we're reciting it and we're learning it. But you got to go from catechism to praxis. How do you put it into practice? The first place I saw it was in building the budget. I said to the congregation, to the finance committee, there are certain things must be in the budget if we're going to be in covenant, because the general church cannot function unless the local church support it. I said, Pastor, what does that mean? I said, well, for me, one, pastor needs to be able to go to General Assembly and to other church functions, so I represent not just you, but we're part of the whole church. And so there's a line item in the budget to this day for the pastor to go to General Assembly, all expenses paid, and on the off year for the national convocation, all expenses paid, because we want you engaged in that. But I said, that's not enough. I said, I want many of you, as many as you can afford to go with me, because if you see the larger church at work, then you'll understand it's not me coming back reporting what I see, it's what you see with me. So we put in the budget based on the formula said that with our active membership, I think we had 7 delegates that could go as voting delegates to the General Assembly. So we budgeted registration for 7 delegates. And best my memory, every year that there was a General Assembly, there was always at least 7 to 10 members of Loudon Avenue that went to General Assembly all over the place. And the folk got used to the fact that this is what we do. We go to General Assembly. In the years we didn't go to General Assembly, we went to National Convocation. But the church paid registration and sometimes helped others who didn't have sufficient funding for housing, etc. But we've always fixed it so 2 people in a room. If the General Assembly was close by, we would take the church bus, transport people. But we wanted people there. I wanted the people of Loudon to enjoy and participate in the whole church. So also Regional Assembly, we don't miss Regional Assembly. It's strange, we never took it into Regional Assembly, we took it to General Assembly, but always part of that and part of District 3. We had an interesting thing with District 3. To fund District 3, each congregation was tasked to give $1 for every active member. Loudon was the largest church in our district. I can remember the figure now precisely. We were saying we had an active membership of 600, so we had to pay $600 every year to District 3. Now this is not what we paid in missions, this is District 3. And I remember someone saying to me, Pastor, why are we paying this money? I said, we're in covenant. We promised that we would support the district, Piedmont, the region, and the general church. And we can't do that just with voice. We have to do that also with finances. But not just with finances. We have to also do it with human presence. So when I say we need to go, to be in covenant, we have to go. And so we talked constantly about covenant, what it means to be in covenant. So one of the blessed ways that we do it at communion, I remind our members, we make sure on just before communion, then we'll go back over a section of the affirmation of faith. God's love binds us. And at this table, we are bound. No one has to make us. No one has to force us. No one has to twist our arms. We do this because we love God. We love each other. We love our church. And so that has worked well throughout my ministry. That part is in the budget. Then I said we need to go a step further. The church asked each of us to support basic mission finance, mission funding. And we need a formula. The church needs to know that Loudon is going to give a certain amount every year. So we came up with what we thought was fair and equitable for us. We put it in the budget. That was a big step for us. And then we did every special day offering. I would write a letter to the congregation explaining the special day offering, why we did it. So if it had anything to do with higher education, I listed every institution that was affiliated with us. If it was Week of Compassion, we'll let them know all the things Week of Compassion would do, all of the blurbs that come out. Thanksgiving, Easter, and Christmas. We did that every year, but not before the letter preceded it, and then pushing them when we had a website. Then I would push them, you can go to the Disciple website and see these things yourself in more detail. So at our church, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, they know that part of covenant is that we participate in these offerings, and then on top of that, we give our basic mission money. It has worked wonderfully well for us. So the church knows that there's a church beyond Roanoke. There's a larger church. So one of the most interesting happened to me, you stay at church a long time, you go through these changes. So in a board meeting, one of the newer members said, Pastor, I need to know, what is our return on investment for all this money we're giving away? I had never heard anybody ask for return on investment in church. But fortunately, because I try to stay attuned to the church, I could quickly say, let me walk you through some stuff. I said, you hear me talk about the fact that I have standing. And so let me explain that further for you. Standing is the gold star, it's a seal of approval, such as a lawyer passing the bar, the doctor passing his medical stuff, and there's an entity that says, this person is fit to do their work. I said, the General Church in Indianapolis, through DHM, says that you have a pastor who is fit to be a disciple pastor. We stand behind Bill Lee. He is credentialed. I said, that's a big deal. They said, oh. I said, now, y'all pay every quarter my pension to the pension fund, which means that at the time I come to retirement, I have a retirement pension. That's a benefit. That's part of covenant. The church says that if you do that, they will guarantee that when I get to retirement age, that your pastor can retire and you don't have to worry about whether y'all were equitable fair with me. I have a pension. I said, wow. I said, let me tell you something else about that. If I'm disabled, you don't have to worry. I'm taken care of by the pension fund. And then I shared with them that our secretary had gone out on disability twice during my tenure, and that the pension fund paid her pension. The church did not have to pay that while she was out. She got disability. We were able to hire someone else for that 6-month period, and it didn't disrupt the church's budget one bit. I said, that's tremendous benefit. I said, you see the chalice on the cross, the St. Andrew's cross? They said, yes. I said, that's like the church saying, this is your brand. You can use our brand. So everybody will know when they pass by Loudon Avenue Christian Church, you're part of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, United States and Canada. I said, it's like marketing. They said, wow. I said, yeah. I said, that's what it's all about. It's covenant. I said, it's not what we just give away, but what we get in return. And what we get in return is far more than what we actually give. So I said, let me remind all of you of the flood of '85. You remember I came to the pulpit and I said to the congregation I needed to spend about 5 to 10 minutes talking about the flood and those members of our church who have been impacted. I said I won't give names, but a lot of people were impacted. They lost refrigerators, freezers, they lost food, they lost furniture. I said I have in my hand, because I had not given them to the finance secretary, 2 checks that have come from Week of Compassion. Johnny Ray called me the day of the flood. They knew the name Johnny Ray, because those are conversations that we had. I said, the Week of Compassion did not wait. Johnny called, he said that the grants are in the mail, Bill. You use these checks and money as best you know how to help your folk. I said, what I'm gonna do is to have this treasurer deposit this money in our benevolence account, and X number of persons who said they've been affected will receive these grants to help them replenish some things they lost. I said, that's what a covenant church does. I said, now, many of you won't know Johnny Ray if you saw him, but you know Week of Compassion. And you see how compassionate they are to us. I said, that happens all over the country. Every time there's a disaster, this happens. I said, but here's the key for us. I asked you to participate in the Week of Compassion offering before there is a disaster, because we have to have accumulated funds so that whenever something happens, it's done. I said, okay, so some of you got upset with me last week because you wanted to participate, because locally they were getting a truckload of water and things to go to, I think there was Katrina. I said, you could participate, but I would not be doing a special drive. And I explained to you why. I said, we are already there. Our staff is on the ground, boots on the ground. Plus, with the other agencies that we partner with, blankets are there, water is there, housing is there. We're working through FEMA. We're doing all of this stuff because you contribute. That's part of covenant. And they said, of course, folks stood up and applauded and said, oh my goodness. I said, I'm just telling you, that's what covenant looks like. When you work with a church like this, it's absolutely wonderful. And that's been my experience. I just think covenant is the way. No one twists your arm. Nobody forces you. This is a volunteer thing on our part. It's a love act. It's what covenant is. No one is going to take anything from us if we don't. But I assure you, we'll miss out on a great deal if we don't participate. So that's why we are engaged in covenant. It's a marvelous way to do church. Many of you knew that in 2007, I was in Fort Worth. I was the moderator of the church. Many of you remember that 2-year period I was gone a lot. Some of y'all fussed a little bit because I was gone. But I stood in the pulpit and explained to you as part of being in covenant, it's not just our money. I thought, and many of you were proud of the fact that the church thought enough of your pastor to call me to be moderator for 2 years. That's part of covenant. I said, now, you do know that the church got a lot of free publicity with your pastor being moderator. It's covenant. And to be in covenant means that you have to give up yourself. The return is greater, but if we didn't get anything in return, part of being in covenant is for us to make those kind of sacrificial gifts. It's been a thrill for me. That's what covenant has done for me. Now, I'm slightly crazy. I thought every Christian church in the country was doing what we were doing. I thought it was absolutely a natural thing that everybody, every pastor was telling their congregations, we're a covenant church. I have certain things I just think the church, every pastor ought to do. I think every pastor ought to come to General Assembly, not because you have to, you want to. Martin Luther King Jr. in his letter from Birmingham jail has that marvelous line when he says that we are, in essence, a single garment tied together into a single state of destiny. This is what it is. We are together moving to some sense of destiny. That's me. That's what I think covenant is. So Bill Lee should be a General Assembly. No one has to make me. Now, I must be honest, something did happen in my life early on that helped me make sure I go to General Assembly. I missed the Anaheim Assembly. And this is where I saw covenant really work for me. I had my ticket, I was registered, but had an accident in my house. My neighbor's car came off the bank and hit my house, so I stayed to get my house in repair. The week after the assembly, I received a letter from Dr. John Humbert, General Minister and President, saying, Bill, I write this letter of concern. I want you to know that you're out of covenant because you did not attend the General Assembly. I said, oh, Lord. Now, I hadn't been pastoring about 8 years. I'm still getting my feet wet, and already I'm dinged. I'm out of covenant. So I met with the elders. I said, I'm out of covenant. I got a letter from the General Minister and President. The General Minister and President wrote me a letter. I said, what am I going to do? And they said, well, Pastor, just call him. So I called John the next day. I'll never forget that laugh. Matter of fact, we had lunch together in Des Moines, which is interesting. John started laughing. He said, you remember that phone call? I said, it wasn't the phone call, John, it was the letter. He said, yeah, that too. And when I spoke to John, he was just laughing. I said, John, I apologize. I'll never do it again. I'll never miss another assembly. Please, I don't want to be out of covenant. Can you fix it? And he said, Bill, I don't have that kind of authority. He said, but I did get your attention, didn't I? And I thought, what would it be like in our church if the gentleman and president had the resources, every regional minister would write their pastors and say, well, prior to the assembly, I'm looking forward to seeing you at the assembly. I pray that your churches have made provision, etc. But if they don't make it, not punitive, not putting them down, but simply writing a letter of concern saying, we miss you because you're a major part of the tapestry of this church. And we pray that all is well with your life, but wanted you to know from us, the regional ministers, the general minister president, we miss you. That's what I was frightened at first when John sent me that letter, but I thought, you mean to tell me somebody realized I wasn't at the General Assembly? All those folk, all those ministers, and they realized that Bill Lee wasn't there. That was a big, big piece for me. So I got a couple of things before I finish it. I think that I would hope that every church would consider, and every pastor. Number one, I think we ought to have an annual day for every pastor to renew their covenant with the church. Again, this is not forced. This is not part of the Episcopal said nobody's making you do it. I just think that in our own moral determination, that I ought to sign somewhere and say, I am a pastor in good standing, the Christian Disciple of Christ, and I am still bound by the covenant of love that God has bound us together. That's all. It says to me, and it says to the church, Bill Lee is still in this thing with you. Then I would like for every congregation to do that. Now, I think everybody should go through that preamble, look at it and say, I believe this. I still believe that this is real. I think this is the way to be. This is a covenantal church, and so I'm going to do it because that's what I want to do. And churches sign off and say, as a church, we are in covenant with the Christian Church Disciple of Christ, and we're going to be a covenantal church. We're going to do those things that help us become stronger. So let me say this in finality. I have a dear friend who was a district superintendent out of Methodist Church. I went to charge conference with him on several occasions, and he scared me to death. The way he talked to the people, the discipline, that was the word, the discipline requires you to do this. And I left those meetings. As a matter of fact, I called for a recess. I'm just a guest. I said, can we go outside and talk? And I said, why you act like that? He said, well, these folk are not following the discipline. And I've been nice to them, but now I got to bring the hammer down. I said, but you sound cruel. He said, Bill, it's not cruel. These folk need to understand they got to pay their claims. They got to. I said, wow. He said, y'all don't do this? I said, no, we're a covenant church. And y'all stay in business? I said, yeah, we stay in business because we got enough people who believe that you don't have to cuss us out or beat us up, that we will do what is right by the church because we're a covenant church. So for me, I don't want a bishop. I don't want a pope. I don't want anybody strong-arming me. But because of covenant, because of the blood of Christ that runs through my life and the lives of those whom I love, Bill Lee will be in covenant. And if I ever pastor again, the church where I pastor will know the affirmation of faith, the preamble, and we'll be in covenant together. Thank you.
Very good. Let's take a moment to reflect on some of these questions. After watching Dr. Lee's encounter with the covenant and how his congregation lived out covenant, there are a few questions here, and this is up for all of us to chat, so that way I'm not the only one speaking. But the first question is, did you find it helpful to hear Reverend Lee describe disciples living together in covenant, not as something forced or required, but as an act of love? And what was meaningful about this description? Yeah, and what was meaningful about this description? So more specifically in the preamble, he's talking about the part that says, in God's covenant of love, it binds us together with each other and with God. So is there anyone that has an answer? Did you find it helpful?
If folks could use the raise hand feature so that you pop up to the top of the screen so we can see you, that'd be wonderful.
Oh, I see Debbie.
Yep. Thank you.
I found it very helpful. His presentation was really inspiring. I know that we struggle with small congregations and resources available, but he certainly makes a case for making that a priority, supporting ministers to go to General Assembly and I think Regional Assembly as well. But that whole covenant discussion really made sense to me, and it's always been kind of a I wouldn't say it's a hard sell, but sometimes we get so entrenched in our own finances that sending scarce resources away where you don't know what, exactly, at least the congregation doesn't know what's happening with it, is difficult sometimes. But I really enjoyed his presentation.
Definitely. Peter?
I thought it was a good presentation and gave a lot of good information that you can use. I know sometimes we've had a difficult time convincing people in our congregation that we should be supporting the regional and church and beyond. And I thought he did a good job of giving some information that might help make it easier to tell people why we should be.
Definitely. And I like, just to kind of follow with what both of you guys had said, I also, going back to that act of love, is that truly is what binds us together. He said something in the video. He said, we don't do it because it's something that we're forced to do, but it's because we love God. And, for me, love is an important component or an ethic in our Christian journey, because with love, there's no fine print. There should be no conditions with love. There shouldn't be footnotes that said, if you love me, but love is love. And so even when resources are scarce, when we hear that there's flooding that's happening or crisis in another Christian community, another church, because of love, we're in covenant, we're in relationship with each other, and we want to help, and so that's what I really appreciated about that. And did you guys find that description meaningful? Okay. Any other thoughts or questions before we move on to the next question? Jen?
Thank you. Yes, I think what I really appreciate was what he said, because I've been in a number of congregations where they do the preamble, maybe not weekly, but at least once a month anyway. I know, and with First Church Disciples Church, I was with, when I first came to the Disciples with Hillcrest, and that's where I heard the affirmation of faith for the first time, and I thought, this is pretty cool. And but what I appreciate what he said was, it's not enough just to do the words, but to move it to practice. Well, he used the word praxis, but and actually, how is it that we live this out? Rather than just, it's not enough just to know it and to believe it. We actually have to live it. And so how is it that we do that? I think that's a really important thing for us to remember.
Definitely. Thank you. All right, let's go to question 2. It says in Reverend Lee's discussion of covenant relationship or covenant as a relationship, is this helpful in understanding your congregation's connection with the wider church? Where do you see covenant as a relationship in your community? Latrice?
I'm not too sure if I'm understanding correctly when I think about community, but I do remember getting an email that was forwarded over to us, and when we were sending help to the refugees and giving supplies and stuff. And I thought, wow, that was really sweet. It was really cool. It was great. It was great that I didn't even know that we were part of anything that was, for the greater good. So when I received that email, it felt good. So I don't know if we were part of that at that time, but I know that we got the email, so I felt good anyways.
I should probably let everyone know that when I registered for the e-letters that come through the disciples, I also, anyone that has a church email, I automatically register them. So that way they stay on top of everything. But yeah, and one of the things, so this is a learning. So for some of you that have been, with the disciples for some time, for those of us that are new, we are still very much learning about the broader church and the different expressions of the church, and so when we talk about learning the three expressions of the disciples of Christ, we're talking of the community that we serve in locally, and then regionally, each there are regions that are broken up. Canada is one whole region, but in the United States, they have several smaller regions that make up the local churches. And then there's the general, the overall, the whole denomination as a whole. And so when we are in relationship with not only our local church and the churches within our local region, we're also in relationship with the larger church. And so when we give to those things, we are part of a bigger picture and helping out a bigger mission. I don't know if that makes sense, and for me, I always believe that God has never called the church, the small individual local churches, to work as an island. We have always been designed to be in community with each other, and how we make a bigger impact in this world is being connected to the region and to the wider church, because in the drop of the bucket, as one small church, we might be able to afford $10, another church $10, but you put 100 churches together, there's $1,000 that we could go give to people that are struggling somewhere else in the world. And so that is so important of being in a covenant relationship with each other. So any other thoughts on this question?
I always have thoughts. I do think I've always, for decades now, believed that what it is that we are saved from is brokenness of relationships, and saved to fullness in relationships, with God, with ourselves, and with the world in which we find ourselves. And I think that so often in the church, we look to the things that we can control and understand, that are easy, like the budgets and the paperwork and the programs and the buildings. And we miss a huge opportunity to really understand what Christ is calling us to, because it's the relationship. And God and God's self is relational, right? God in three parts is in relationship with itself and with us, and is constantly reaching out towards us, and we are to reach back, and so I think for me, it takes my faith to a far deeper level to consider that what we are together is not an organization necessarily, but a relationship. And it is these relationships that actually change the world, really, one by one. So I think it makes a huge difference thinking about the church as a covenant organization. And like with the last video that we watched a couple nights ago, where I can't remember what her name was, unfortunately, but she talked about contract, and the difference between contract and covenant. And I think the more that we personalize this, and I mean that, in a way that we get down to being, to remembering that we are human beings rather than human doings, then actually what we'll get to is really the essence of what Jesus was talking about and how he lived his life. And even those that went on before him too. It's always been about the relationship and never about the institution.
And I just want to add one more thing before going to the next question, because I don't see anyone's hands raised yet, but if you raise your hand, I promise I'll shut up. But that, so from the video that was from last week, just defining that really helped. And I know that was the last session 2, but it really did help in defining the difference between a contract and a covenant, meaning relationship. And what really stood out in Reverend Bill's message is when he received that letter from the general minister, as if he was going to be scolded or scorned. But the thing about relationship is it brings you into communion with each other. We have conversations with each other. When you have a contract and you sever that contract, it's legally binding. And I think that's what the other lady was saying in session 2, where there's ramifications for breaking that contract. But when we're in covenant with each other, it becomes this relationship. And to think that the creator of the universe, the divine parent, the divine one who spoke things into existence, is the one who says, I want to have this communal, covenantal relationship with you. And if you mess up, we can talk it through. We can work it through, and individually you mess up, we'll talk it through. As a church, you mess up, we talk it through. As a region, we talk it through. And, even if we mess up as a wider church, we talk it through, because we're all in relationship with each other, and relationships take work, getting to know each other, getting to know how we work together. So that balance, right? So that to me is, it's just one of the things that I love so much about our church is this covenant that binds us together in love. That is something I really greatly appreciate about our church disciples. All right, so let's go on to question number 3. Oh, there's someone. Yes.
Hi. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Hillcrest. One of the things that our church is sort of noted for is we're not talking only about the central church, because the same discipline has been handed down to our auxiliaries, disciples men, disciples women, and Christian Youth Fellowship. If you go through their activities, they have been taught the same discipline to share. And so even if they don't actually take part in the global situation, they do that on a local basis. So it helps to unite the churches within the community, and it doesn't also rest with just disciples of Christ, but the other denominations within the sphere. Just thought I'd drop that in.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely appreciate that, because there, the huge ecumenical movement of that the disciples is part of, I think is huge, right? And that we understand the overall church, the church, capital C, I think is very important, and how we fit into that. It reminds me of Paul's teaching, where he says that we're all different members of the body, but jointly together we function together as one, and that is truly what we're all doing, right? And so I appreciate that. Any other thoughts? No. Okay, let's go on to question 3. So as we think of disciples as a covenantal church, does Reverend Bill Lee's practice at communion of reminding members of the statement from the preamble of God's covenant of love, which binds us together to God and one another? He goes on to say, no one has to make us, no one has to force us, no one has to twist our arms. We do this because we love God, we love each other, and we love our church. Does this description of covenant help you better understand the relationship of your congregation with other parts of the Christian church, disciples of Christ? What is helpful and what doesn't resonate well? Any thoughts? So does anyone have any, Latrice, go ahead.
So I wouldn't say that I have any questions. I think it did give me I don't even know if it's to say understanding. When I think about just individually and myself and wanting to do for the Lord, do for my church, do for my community, do for my children, and it's the same thing, right? I don't want, my arm doesn't need to be twisted. I just genuinely just do it because I love the Lord. And it's a great way of giving, right? It's a great way of helping. And I know that for me, if I can't do it, it makes me feel some type of way as well. So, I struggle with this particularly, but it does resonate with me when he says that we do it for love and not because, any one church is, forcing it or, coming up with so many things and just speaking about money when there's many different ways that we can be in covenant as he was speaking today in the video.
Definitely. Anyone else? Yep. Debbie?
Yeah, I think his words really make sense. And it is one of the things that I really appreciate about the disciples is that there isn't anyone telling us what we have to believe, what we have to do, what we have to, what we're committed to, but that it's an understanding that we're committed to the church and each other and God, and that is really the covenant that we're recognizing. And I think that it's one of the strengths of the disciples church too, that we don't have a lot of top-down administration telling us what we can and can't do. And it gives us the freedom to really explore what we can do and to really stretch our limits as far as the things that we want to do to show our love for our community and for God.
Definitely appreciate that. Yes. Any other thoughts, Jen?
Part of that question right at the very end was what didn't resonate. I appreciate Bill, and I've known Bill for a long time, especially when he was a moderator because I was on the board at the same time, and so I appreciated his leadership. I think that what doesn't resonate as much for me, although he spent a lot of time talking about it, was about the money and about budgeting, and I think that it does start there for a lot of our congregations. I'm not in disagreement with him at all, because we can't, like the region and the general church exists to lift up the ministry of the local congregation. We're not here for any other reason than to support, like to be in relationship with everybody else and to encourage and build up the ministries of local congregations. That's why we're here. But we can't do it if we don't have resources, right? And so that's part of the covenant, and that's part of the reciprocity of it all. It's not a vertical covenant, it's a horizontal one. And as funds flow through to the region, then we're able to do more for the local congregations. And as we share resources amongst each other, then we're able to support one another. But I think too, is it can't be left just at budget lines and supporting general offerings and supporting the regional church and the general church. I think I think the way that we can also live out this kind of covenant is through prayer, we have our prayer calendar that we put out every year, and we ask every congregation to pray on every Sunday for a certain area or ministry or congregation across Canada, and the special offerings as well. But it's also reaching out and trying to find ways to build relationship with one another. So one of the great ideas that came out at our board meeting for the last year anyway, has been how do our traditional or established congregations get to know the new congregations more, and how do our new congregations get to know the established congregations more. And it was recommended that the congregations do a short video that could actually be shared on those prayer days, like on those Sundays where we're praying for a certain church, that we could actually have a short little video to be able to introduce the congregations to one another a little bit more. But I think it's also taking the initiative to serve, to serve on boards. We have some really exciting stuff coming up that we're hoping folks will get involved with. And it's also taking the initiative as a congregation to reach out to other congregations. It shouldn't have to be the region that says, oh, you know what, it would be great if everybody, sent us a video. But actually, if you're curious about Freedom Church, to get in touch with the folks at Freedom Church and say, hey, can we do a conference call together? Can we, so it's actually getting out of our comfort zones and saying, what does the love of God require of me? How do I live out this covenant in ways that are unique and different, and maybe challenge the boundaries around that I've built around, or that we've built around ourselves. Like she said it last week, and if we're living in tents instead of fortresses, then we can do a lot more. And if we start to think about who we are as church, and what does it mean to be the church, in different kinds of ways, and I think that we can do really incredible things. And then this covenant language isn't so foreign. It actually becomes something that we live every day, because we do live it every day. We just don't think about it.
Definitely. And I appreciate that. I think I 100% agree with you on the being holistic in our approach to relationship with each other, not just one aspect. Yeah, I actually really like how he talks about this at communion, which I don't follow any specific liturgy when we do communion at our church. So I just, I hope that, none of y'all come to our church and visit us and grade us on how we do it, because today I totally messed up. I wanted to serve communion to people and have them come up because we had a smaller group this morning. And I think, and Reverend Jen and I have had conversations. I think we've had conversations about this around the table, and about people coming to the table and the table going to people. So we do both. We just kind of, this morning I just felt I want to personally give communion to each person coming up. So I blessed it. I prayed over it. And people came up, and they weren't sure if they were to take it or if they were holding on to it. So half the congregation took, because we do the prepackaged communion. I was trying to open it up before I handed it out to make it easier. It was just, I said, you know what, Mother Lenny, she's one of our elders at the church, and she typically does communion, and she was off sick today. And so I said, it's all good. But the thing that I like about communion is, at our church, we've been reframing the way that we do communion and how we talk about it. And we focus more on the love of the table. We talk about the cup being the love that, is poured out for all. And so I find it very fitting that Reverend Lee started introducing the preamble, especially the part that this is a covenant of love that binds us together and to one another. I think that's huge, that it binds us together to other humans, as well as, and we don't talk about it often as we should, but also non-human life. We don't talk about the reciprocality that we should have with this whole planet and the things of this earth, because we are in this earth, and so the redemption and the love of God wasn't just for those of us that are humans to subdue this earth and do what we want with it. I always try to remind our congregation that we also must love this earth, and we must take care of this planet as well. And I don't know if that makes any sense, or if I'm just kind of rambling on. It's kind of where one of my heart passions are, because and I suppose maybe to locate where I'm coming from is the majority of my Christian faith was through the evangelical circles. And one of the things that's one of my biggest issues that I have is this idea of escapism, that God's going to give us a new planet. We've been called to do whatever we want on this earth because we're kings and princesses, and he called us to have dominion here. So we're just going to go to the new earth and do whatever we want here. And I think that that's far from the truth. I think we have a huge account that that we are going to have to give for how we treated this planet, because God never told us that we were to rule and reign on this planet. He said we were to take care of it and work in relationship with non-human life as well. And so for me, when I think of the love at the table, it's to also remind us of that. And how do we, so anyways, that's my little spiel there and why I like what he did. So does anyone have anything they want to say? Do we want to move on?
Jonathan, I think that's the very good example of covenant is the earth and our stewardship of it. Our daughter was just visiting, and I'm telling you, it drove me crazy because she would help a slug get off the road because she didn't think he was going to make it across the whole way. And it drove me crazy, but I really have taken a different look at slugs since then, and other creatures that we all are part of a whole big thing that is a covenant. We will be reciprocated for what we do with the earth.
I appreciate that you said that, because you're right. God put us in covenant relationship with God and the created order, the created beings that are on this earth as well, and yeah, I think we've missed the mark. Somewhere along the way, I think our capitalistic mindset missed the mark, and let's keep pulling as much oil. I'm sorry. Let's go on to the next question, because I could go on forever about ecology and all of that. So we'll go on to question 4. So is Reverend Lee's reference to Martin Luther King, Dr. King Jr. visions of threads tied together in a single garment, a tapestry, helpful for understanding disciples as a covenantal church? Why or why not? So he said our covenant relation is like the thread that holds the tapestry together. Was that helpful? Was it not helpful for anyone?
I don't think that for me, helpful or not helpful, I just think when he was speaking, it just brought to light what is already in our heads, and we don't actually know that we're doing it. And maybe that's because it's just second nature to us, because we have been walking for the Lord and we are connected with the Lord, and we know that it is our responsibility to weave together, to be together and intertwined with people, all people, because that's the whole purpose of being a disciple, is to bring to witness and to bring people into the covenant of God. So I don't know if it really has, if it works for me or doesn't. It just brings, the thoughts to the forefront of your head. And I think that personally, listening to it and stuff, I think that's what the whole video to me just kind of represents, is just us being mindful of the things and recognizing that we're doing it, and it's a second nature, which makes me feel good. Makes me feel good that it's a second nature to love other people.
And if I just to add to the image of the tapestry, I think that the complexity of a tapestry, you've got the different images, you've got the different shapes, the different colors, the different textures, really does represent the disciples and the overall church, because I appreciate, I can't remember who was saying, that the disciples don't say you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. It allows for that individuality, that individual expression of faith. But the other image of a tapestry is when you begin to pull out one string, it all starts to kind of come undone. And so the idea that I maybe just want to throw out there, and you could tell me if maybe this is wrong, is that we need each other. that I need your thread and you need my thread and we need the thread down the road and the thread over there to keep this tapestry together. And that's what the relationship is. We need these relationships to keep together what God has sown in this world for all of us. Yeah. Okay, so no one disagreed, so that's good. You got your rocks there beside you for a moment. All right, let's go to number 5.
Jonathan, we are disciples, right? So we might disagree, but it is okay if we disagree.
It's true. Would regular use, so this is more for individuals. So would regular use of the preamble in worship as an affirmation of faith be helpful to your understanding of how disciples live together in covenant? So would this help us individually for us to understand if we read this in our worship regularly?
Can I just mention one thing? We do have some folks from a couple congregations that do use the preamble regularly in worship. I'd be curious to know their thoughts on whether or not they see this as something that's helpful, or has it become part of just the regular Sunday practice? Too, as another way of looking at that question, right? So, because not all of our congregations do it, but a few do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Hillcrest, for one, do that once a month.
Okay.
You know, the fourth Sunday of every month, we do that. And it is indeed helpful, because if there's a stranger in the congregation that has never been to our church and know our form of worship or what we stand for, the preamble tells them this in a nutshell, because it's not a creed. And so they wouldn't say, well, I guess they're like the Catholic Church. So, and there is emphasis that it is not a creed. So it's like a guideline, you know, or as I said, something in a nutshell to give someone food for thought if they're a stranger to the practice and a stranger to the church. It's a big help.
Definitely. Thank you. I see Tamila's hand is raised.
Yes, and I apologize for the background noise. There's just a lot going on in this house currently, but I think that it would be beneficial to be discussed, to be reminded or used as a preamble on a regular basis, not necessarily on a weekly basis, but just enough to remind congregations about covenants, because I think that it's something like, especially how there's a lot of division in the church. I think that just reminding everyone of a covenant, even just, I feel like with different, there's a lot of, even within the church, it could be within one church. It doesn't necessarily have to be within different churches with different religious backgrounds, but I think that it's just a good reminder as to what purpose that we're here to serve.
Definitely. Peter and Janet.
Well, we read it periodically in the church, not on a regular basis, but from time to time it's read. But I really think reading it is interesting. But unless you have some knowledge of what these words mean, like this covenant, I think there needs to be some more explanation given, maybe for some parts of it as we do it, to help make it a little clearer than it is just by itself. And I particularly like the way Bill Lee did it tonight. Although that's a little long-winded to do in a service, but parts of it could be used to, each time it's read to kind of emphasize something and give it more meaning. I think I kind of feel like if we're just reading it without any kind of background information or any explanation, that it becomes just something you do rather than something that has real deep meaning.
Definitely, and I actually really appreciate what you said. I think more explanation and Tamiwa, definitely maybe adding this to something we do at our church. And as Elaine, you were saying, you do it once a month at Hillcrest. I think it is a good thing to do regularly. And even as I've read through it over a few times, there's pieces that I would love to pull out for certain aspects of worship, like the communion piece, the baptism piece. Those things could be said directly from the preamble. So Debbie?
And I was going to say sort of the same as Peter. Sometimes church can be a club, like things that if you aren't familiar with going to church and the ups and standing and sitting and singing and all the rest of it, you feel like an outsider. And sometimes we need to be careful in how we present things. I visit in BC a couple times a year and go to the church there, and they do the passing of the peace. So everybody's up hugging and saying hi and everything. And it really is intended to make you feel very welcome. But as an outsider, it makes you feel really alienated, like you don't know anybody. And that, people are kind of hesitant to come over and speak to you and that sort of thing. And so it actually does the opposite than making you feel welcome. It makes you feel like more of an outsider. And I think I think it's really good for disciples to know the preamble and taking out pieces of it, but you do need some explanation, and it needs to be meaningful when it's recited or read or whatever, that you don't want it to become a password kind of thing. Even the Lord's Prayer, sometimes people who haven't been brought up in church and don't know the Lord's Prayer feel pretty alienated when they go to church and they don't have, everybody's saying this and they don't know what it is.
I really appreciate that. Made me think. So sometimes I would tell people to get up and shake someone's hand that you don't know, to kind of make them feel welcome. But we did that once, maybe about a month ago, and it just turned into this whole social hour trying to get people to get back to the seat before I could preach my sermon. So the passing of the peace is, how I don't know. We try to do that at the end of service. That way we can get through everything. But yeah, I think that would be one of the cautions, that we don't fall into a repetition of saying something that has no meaning, no weight behind it, and we're just offering lip service and not, really understanding what the preamble is and how do we live that out in covenant, right, with each other. And I think that's huge. But lots of great ideas. I know myself, I am most likely going to figure out how to start incorporating this into our daily worship at Freedom. Yeah. All right, let's go to number 6. So would an annual service of commitment to our covenantal relationship as disciples be helpful in strengthening your congregation's relationship with the other expressions of the church? What would the annual service celebrating covenantal relationships look like in your congregation? All right. Any thoughts? Tamiwa?
Yes. So I'm not sure if you remember, but your church a few years back did you guys did a workshop. There was a whole book on it. I can't remember specifically. Yes, sorry. Sorry, our church. you guys did a workshop and there was a book on it. It was a really good workshop. And at that workshop, I don't remember who led it. I don't remember much about it, to be honest. I just remember it being a really good time because we were put into groups where we had to sit with people who we would not usually talk to. And the questions that we were forced to ask when we did group work were, they basically pulled everyone out of their shell. And it just, that question just reminded me of it because it brought a lot of people together that wouldn't usually be together. So I do agree with something like that. And I only remember doing it the one time at the church, but it was probably one of my favorite events that took place there.
Was it the Art of Knowing God?
Yes, that was it.
Yeah. Reverend Jen?
Yeah, I was smiling at some of that because yeah, those small group things are never fun for me, but I have to do them, and I regularly feel forced to do them and forced to lead them. So, yeah. I wonder if, so a lot of our established congregations have anniversary services. And during my time in pastoral ministry, I attended and many anniversary services, of course, with the congregations I was with, but now and as regional minister, I've attended even more of those. But I guess I wonder whether or not the focus of those anniversary services that we already do, it's all across the country, could actually be about the reaffirmation of the covenant and what does it mean to be church, rather than just simply, we're going to get together and have a potluck and special music, which is fun. Like it's fun and wonderful. But but knowing that, and inviting the other churches into our anniversary services, or these annual events, to remind us that it's not just about the covenant that we hold with one another in this local congregation, but across the greater church. I think this is one of the things what I've appreciated over the last couple of years, in pandemic time, is that we've actually been able to do things with more people across the church being involved. Like in all week's ordination, for instance, a couple of months ago, we had folks from across the country and the US and in the Philippines, all over the place, at being able to attend that service. And it really was a recovenanting, it was a celebration of the covenant that she was making, but also the church's covenant to one another as well. And being present with one another is just so important, especially outside of the congregations, because as the nature of the church changes, not the nature of it, the geography of it, I guess, like how we've gone, none of us remember 200 years ago, but we had a lot more churches 200 years ago. Well, yeah, we did, but 100, 50 years ago, 80 years ago, we had more churches than we did 200 years ago, but I digress. But the further apart we get across the country, and the busier our schedules are, and the more that we have to do things this way in order to accomplish anything, the less likely we are to really see ourselves outside of our local congregation, right? We don't really visit with one another regularly. So having an annual service, like if we did each have, or maybe we have one as the general church, or as a regional church, we have something like that where we come together and recovenant with one another to renew the covenant with one another. It's probably the best way to say it. So might be an interesting thing to think about. Thank you.
No, definitely you are correct. All right, let's go on to question number 7. So Reverend Lee stresses the importance of putting our covenant with the wider church into practice through money and presence, and making sure support for the wider church is in the budget. And pastors and members of the congregation are present at assemblies and other gatherings of the church. So there are a few questions here. So which of the practices described by Reverend Lee does your congregation embrace? Does the congregation contribute to the Disciple Missions Fund? Do we collect special day offerings? Do your congregations and yourself encourage pastors and members to attend the General Assembly or regional assemblies? And what are some of the ways your church lives in covenant with the whole church? Maybe we could take a few seconds just to kind of think about these questions. Reverend Jen?
I'd just like to say that I am totally in line with Bill's thinking on this, and any church that I've ever worked with have always tried to get folks to come and to ensure, like with the new church plant in Sugar Bush, it went into the budget immediately that there was resources for not just the pastor, but folks, anybody who wanted to go to do that, because I do think it's important. It's so important for us to make sure that there's resources. We do not have to scramble to find them, but that there's resources for folks to engage in all of the manifestations of the church, to contribute to the offerings and those sorts of things. I also would like to say a special thank you to the Milton Church, because they do, and they have for years and years and years, helped with getting others in the maritime area and across Canada and our youth out to event, and folks across Canada to come to the regional assembly, and have underwritten the costs of that. So I really do appreciate their support in all of that.
Anyone else? Doug? Oh, I think you have to unmute, Doug.
Sorry, I'm just going to reiterate what Jen is saying. It is important, and I know we try, and it's important on so many levels, that especially if you're new to the church, to the disciples, you want to know that are there others? Am I all alone in this church? So when you get together and you meet with other disciples from other churches, you get different perspectives, and you start to learn what disciples are all about as well, because you see them in action. And that's important. And for pastors to take advantage of every opportunity to attend the seminars, etc. I know when I attended the new students seminar down in Nashville, I came from a seminary that was Anglican based, and I was the disciple in it. So when I finally met other disciples, and not just 2 or 3 of them from Ontario, but like 50, 60 of them, it was exciting, and it just re-energizes you. And so your idea of your service is strengthened, I think. So yeah, what Jen is saying, and believe me, there's been no stronger voice than Jen Garvin in trying to get people active and participating. So I'm a fan of hers, by the way. So.
Very good. Thank you, Doug. Anyone else? Tamiwa?
Sorry, it's just once Sophia quieted down, I was very excited to start answering questions. But one thing that I would say that our church does in covenant with the whole church is every Sunday, the reminder when the offering is done is, sorry, I'm stuck on the words right now. The words about the table, or no, this church, you might not belong to this church, but this church belongs to you. I know that that's something that is stressed every single week, and it's a really nice way of making everyone feel welcome and taking a come one, come all type of approach.
Yeah. And just to kind of explain why I say that and then go back to some regional commitments. I learned that in seminary, and part of the reason why I say that you may not belong to this church, but this church belongs to you, because I believe that the covenant relationship that we have, not only with each other in the four walls, has to extend out into that community, into that neighborhood. We are there as a resource. And I have learned, so I said a very dangerous prayer years ago when I first entered ministry. I said, God, send me the people that nobody else wants, and I'm not saying, send me, misfits and stuff like that, but it seems like every church has their image of who should attend their church. And you don't dress a certain way, you don't act a certain way, and that just irritates me. So I said, God, send the people that feel that they just don't fit in there, because this is a place for them. And wouldn't you know that God started sending folks our way that really broke me out of the mold of my my little box, folks that after we just got done worshiping, get in their car, light up a cigarette, and go and eat some chicken wings on their front porch, and just real life people. It really did break me out of the box, and I appreciate God for that. And so when we say that, we really mean that. And people come into the office throughout the week who don't even belong to our church, but say, can I have a word of prayer? Or I need some food. And so we got a little pantry and we help people. And so I think that those are really good ways of how we live in covenant with the people in our immediate neighborhood. But then looking at the region, being the newest church, I have to tell you how encouraged I am to meet all of you, to meet all the ministers. In fact, I seriously hope, because I got some of their emails, and I think I email a lot. Someone says I email a lot. I don't know, Reverend Jen, do you think I email a lot? She ain't saying a thing, but I'm constantly emailing everyone. And Pastor Owe, she'll pipe up and say, let's grab a Zoom call or something. And she's been it's been such an encouragement. And Reverend Janet and every person that I've met in our, I would say the region, because for some reason I just think of Ontario as one, but the region's all of Canada. So I think I have to do a better job at introducing myself to every church in Canada. But I'm working my way up Ontario, and then I'll get to the other provinces. But Doug, I have to agree with you. It's just an encouragement when you can see other people and you can experience other expressions of faith. I didn't after I preached at the campground, no one sent me a letter and said, you're too crazy, don't come back. So that we can see each other's expression, I think really just encourages each and every one of us. And it's a huge encouragement that when Reverend Bill was talking about it, he says, when the pastor's encouraged, the congregation's encouraged. We are encouraged together. Yeah. So it is important that we attend these assemblies, right? Anyone else? No? We ready to go on to question 8? All right. So do you think the mission and ministry of your congregation would be enhanced through experiencing the diversity of disciples by being present at wider church gatherings? If so, how?
I do. I think that it would. One, because we're a small church, we're kind of a small city, we're not that big, and it would just be nice to go out and meet other Christians and see, as you said, how they express and just be able to intertwine and know that even though we're apart, we are still one. And so I think so, yes.
And I like what you just said there, because it just reminded me of that scripture that Paul says that there's one Lord, one baptism, one faith. We really are one. We're not just locally one, regionally one, and denominationally one, but we are one in the Christian community as well. And so I appreciate that you said that. Anyone else? Debbie?
I have certainly found it encouraging and revitalizing to attend regional assemblies. I've never been to General Assembly, but not only do you meet people you don't know, but you meet people who have connections that you didn't even know about. I remember meeting a couple in Edmonton who were from West Gore, or she grew up in West Gore and knew my mother-in-law. And so, and then when, like we say, the regional prayer partner every Sunday in church, and when you know somebody from that congregation, it becomes more meaningful. You have a connection, and I think that unfortunately with COVID, we've lost a lot of face-to-face connections, and I think it would be Zoom is very beneficial, but face-to-face and meeting people and being able to make a personal connection is so important.
Definitely. Anyone else? Peter?
I think it's been very important in both Janet's and my participation in the church beyond the congregation, to be involved with people from across Canada and in the States to some extent, and that's great. And for example, your name has been said, but until tonight, I had no idea what you looked like, and so I feel like I know you a lot better now than I did before. And if it was in person, it'd be even better.
I definitely am looking forward to the day when we can all gather together in person. I think that would be great. And I was just trying to flip through my pages. There was another video that I watched, and it might be the next session next week, but it has to do with, I think, the diversity of the disciples. And maybe I'm wrong. I was trying to flip through the paper, but the lady that was speaking was talking about the different. So I think, Sister Elaine, you were saying the auxiliaries, but the different branches of, there's the convention, there's, the different groups in the disciples. There is the Spanish speaking ministry, which was very intriguing to me, because we have at our church a few Spanish speaking people. And so I'm trying to find ways to get them connected to that as well. And I think if for us to see all this different diversity is very encouraging, in my opinion. Yeah. All right, let's go on to question 9. All right. So Reverend Lee expressed surprise that every disciple congregation was not involved in serious study and practice of covenant as they were at his congregation. What would happen if all disciples were involved in such practice? Would you advocate with the leadership of your congregation for serious ongoing conversations about the covenantal nature of the Christian church, disciples of Christ? What would the program look like in your congregation? Jen? Reverend Jen?
I will start off very quickly. I'm just aware of our time as well, but my take on this question is that if we don't have these conversations, we're going to run into some really serious problems. We will become even more fractured. Like we talk about ourselves as a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world, and I do believe that by by digging into our identity as the church, as children of God, as a covenant people, bound together by this covenant of love in Jesus Christ. By ignoring that conversation, we do ourselves a disservice. We just keep doing business as usual and hoping things will change. But really, what people outside of the church, and especially those that were with the church at one point and have decided to move on, one of their biggest issues is that they don't feel connected. They don't feel like they're in covenant. They don't feel they're in relationship with a church, with people, not the church. Like, I think we have this idea currently of the church, and it's almost like a painting from 50 years ago, and we all think this is what the church is, when in fact the church has never been that. And because we put relationships secondary 50 years ago and started focusing more on institution, we're where we're at today. And I really do think that if we don't start engaging these conversations in a serious way, especially at the local level, then we're going to be in big trouble, because it's whatever else we're doing, it's relationship that is important. It's what the gospel is about. It's love. It's being together. It's not just within the disciples, but with everything, like you say. So yeah, I think that we have some amazing leaders all across the church who have a full capacity and skill and passion around developing these kinds of things. And because we have the technology, we can also do it together. So like online, if we needed to, or in groups, like local groups, and then we're able to study online again too. But I think it's an essential conversation we have to be having.
And if I could just say one thing, because you had me just kind of in a tangent, Reverend Jen. I think not only locally should we be talking about these relationships, but I maybe just throw this out, or maybe this already happens, but in a regional network or regional picture, it would almost be ideal if we could resource share. What type of systems work at your church? Because I think of some of the systems that we do at our church that aren't done at other churches. And I had opportunity to sit down with a former pastor of one of our larger churches in Windsor. It was a church that was about 1,500. And so that is a mega church here in Canada, I think, unlike the States when you have like 10, 15,000 people. And I said, how do you retain? How do you retain people? And I think that's the biggest question a lot of pastors have is we get new visitors that come out. We have this awesome 10-4 follow-up plan that we develop. We connect with a person 10 times within 4 weeks, and then we figure out how do we connect them to the church. But the question is about that retention piece. And one of the things that they said, it was like a light bulb just went off, is they had retired elders in their church who would dedicate 1 day a week, and they would make about maybe 5 or 6 phone calls, and they would just call people and check in. How are you doing? How can I pray with you? And have those really intentional relationship moments with people that would come, and then they would remember it, and they would come on Sunday morning, and they'd be part of the community, and then they started serving in different aspects of the church. And I thought that's a really cool thing, and that would be something that would be great to share at a resource table, to say, hey, this is an idea, like how can we bounce it around, and then also just some of my observations I seen, when we were at the campground, communion was ran in a way that reminded me of a Baptist church that I had visited once years ago. 2 people sitting at the front and we don't do that at our church. And I would love to know different liturgical practices that maybe would fit at our church, or something that we could do different, right? And I think that would be an expression of covenant with each other in the region. I don't know if we already do that, but that was just kind of where you had my mind going, Jen. So. But does anyone have anything they want to say with this last question about what would we do with our congregation? I think I think for me, if you know, if we're to be serious about this, I absolutely love the idea that Sister Elaine was talking about at Hillcrest, how you read the preamble every month, and then I think Peter and Debbie, you guys were both saying that let's do some explanation around it. I almost think that if we did this once a month to try and incorporate it into the sermon somehow, where we talk about the points or be able to teach. The other thing that I would think is we do a Next Steps membership class. And so anyone that wants to be a member of our church, I sit down with them one-on-one and I talk to them about our statement of faith, what we believe, where you can serve in the ministry, what would you like to do, what gifts and talents you have. I'm actually thinking I want to include the preamble in the Next Steps membership class. So not only we read it together, but give them a copy so they could take it home, hang it on their fridge, you know, and it's there, or put it in their Bible. So when they're studying, they can pull it out, right? I think that would be some of the programming that I would want to introduce. And then, like I said, as I read through it, I think for those special, you know, when we do communion, I want to maybe say that statement. So it's always being embedded in what we do. So we remind ourselves of the love that we've been bound together in, right? Any of you guys think? What would you do at your church if you're not already doing it?
I think that it's really important to talk about covenant. What springs to mind is just our own difficulties with people being involved, and that a lot of people seem content to come to church and go home and that's about it. And just lately we've been doing renovations on the parsonage, and there's not a lot of people who are willing to, you know, kind of help. And I think that is also where covenant is important, that this church won't exist if we don't all commit to being involved and giving as well as receiving. And it might be a risky conversation sometimes, but I think to introduce the concept of covenant might come to mind without you having to say, okay, listen, guys. So I think it's a really good idea.
Definitely. Or we could offer gift cards or something to try it. No, I'm just playing. I think they call that bribery. Okay. Well, if there's no other thoughts or questions, I know we're pushing up Sister Elaine. Ministry Elaine.
You know, most of our older churches have been practicing covenant all the years they've been in existence. So what is being said is not new. And I bring back the point with the auxiliaries, which are sort of the ground bodies that really practice the covenant. And then it goes up, it comes back to the church on a whole. It's like sending the disciples out to, you know, preach. And also the church's role within the community in which the churches reside, the connection between the church and the community, not necessarily seeking new members, but working together in the sort of ecumenical situations that come up. For instance, World Day of Prayer.
Yeah.
You know, situations like that where I think the disciples women had sort of taken over the being leadership within in that sort of participation. And that has helped the church to be covenantal, even during like COVID times, because normally we do this once a year.
Mhm.
And we were able to do that during COVID, although it was on the Zoom. Sorry, I forgot to turn my phone down. Sorry.
That's okay.
But so the grassroots is where it starts,
Yeah.
or trickle down from the church body down to, and that's where you meet the people, the community,
Mhm.
and that's the connection that has to be maintained and enhanced. So all of this, for instance, you know, the surprise that I guess Dr. Bill mentioned about not as many congregations is taking part in this covenant situation.
Mhm.
I'll give you one example. For instance, Hillcrest collects, I think, a special offering for something at least 10 months out of the 12 months of the year. And sometimes in the same month, 2 different offerings. And these are all special offerings, including the 4 that's been, you know, established by the church.
Mhm.
So there are things the local church can be doing that do emphasize covenantal relationships.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just the maintenance of the situation. For instance, we used to have in the area, Witchwood Presbytery. And this was the ministers of the churches within that pocket of the different congregations used to meet once a month. And those ministers would be like a sounding board.
Mhm.
You know, what's happening in your church in connection with the members, and, you know, and they were support for each other.
Mhm.
And in coming together like that, I think everybody, you know, they always say, if you know somebody else that's going through the same situation that you're going through, misery loves company.
Mhm.
It can also be a source of solace, saying you're not alone in this thing, and you know, keep trying and never give up. And I don't know if I'm expressing myself the way I ought to be expressing myself, but there's some of the things that we call traditions that are, another name for it is covenantal, you know, that has been tried and true. It
Mhm.
has worked.
Definitely. It,
So
it sounds like there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge that can be gained from especially Hillcrest. I think that that's one of the older, more established congregations in this area. I'm maybe wrong on that, but as you were speaking, Minister Elaine, I was just thinking I need to take a trip up to the 401 and visit you all, and
you'd be
get
quite
to know
welcome.
you guys there. I think that would be great. So,
Mhm.
well, let's clear our hearts and minds, and let's pray. This has been an amazing session. I have enjoyed all the feedback, and am very encouraged. So if we can just pray together. So God, you are the master weaver. We thank you that you have woven us together as a covenantal church. Those who have gone before us have tried their hands at writing it down and making it plain so that way we might study and put into practice what it means to be in covenant with each other. In our congregational and wider church life, may we renew our commitment to you, holding ourselves and one another accountable, resting assured that you hold this garment we call our church together, connected by the bond of love in Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Just a reminder, everyone, our next sessions, our last session will be on Wednesday this week at 6 p.m. and Awit will be our leader that day. And please, if you have not registered for the AGM and business meeting, please do that. We are getting close to having a quorum for the business meeting. We still need some delegates from some churches that have not registered as delegates with us yet. So please get that done as soon as possible. And please make sure that you join us on the Saturday evening at 7 p.m. so that you could meet Terry Hord Owens, if you have not met her yet, who's our general minister and president. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Jonathan, for leading a great session. And I look forward to seeing everybody soon.